In this video, we will take a look at the new 3D features in After Effects and how you can use the Substance 3D toolset to enhance your 3D workflow for your After Effects projects. Here, the watch is textured in Substance Painter. If you would like to learn more about this process, be sure to check out part 1 of Getting Started in 3D with After Effects. Now that everything is set and ready to go, I can send this right into After Effects. And I can do that by just simply coming to File and choose the Send to option. And here you'll see that I have this Send to After Effects option. Let's first take a look at Configure. So here I have my output directory where I want to save the 3D file format. Typically, you would set this to the directory where you have your After Effects project saved. For the file format, we have two options. You have GLB, which is default, and then you have GLTF. At this time, using a GLB or GLTF is the preferred 3D format to use for 3D and After Effects. And we can export this, as I said, directly from Substance Painter. GLB is a great option because all the texture maps are contained within the GLB file itself, so you have just this one file that you need to work with. Okay, so I already have this set up, so let's go back, and I'll go to my file, Send to, and I'm going to send this to After Effects. Here you can see that an export process has completed, and now I can jump over to After Effects. So now here we are in After Effects, and you can see here in my project I have this GLB, again, that was exported from Substance Painter, ready for me to use in my After Effects project. So now I'll select this GLB and simply drag and drop it here onto my comp icon to create a new composition. And you'll see here that I have this option here for object scale. What I'll do is just simply select the Make Comp Size. And this is going to scale the 3D model to match the comp size. With this set, I can simply hit OK, and now I'm ready to go. Here in my 3D view, I can already see that I have my 3D object, and here in the layer stack, I can see that I have my 3D layer. So now, let's take a look at some of the basics to working with 3D assets here in an After Effects project. There is a new Properties panel that allows me to transform the 3D model. I can change things like the anchor point or the position by just changing the value. Now, we can also change this value by using the Transform tool here in the 3D view. So for example, if I mouse over the axis handle for the X, click and drag, I can reposition the 3D model here. So now let's look at how we can navigate this 3D view. So here at the top of the toolbar, we have a few tools. So we have an Orbit Around Cursor tool, we have the Pan Under Cursor tool, and we also have this Dolly Towards Cursor tool. And so you can come up and select each one of these different tools. So for example, if I grab the orbit and I just click and drag in the viewport, I can orbit around the 3D object. So I'm going to undo that orbit, and let's look at a more practical way to navigate our viewport. So I'm going to use some keyboard shortcuts. I can hold down the Alt or Option key and use my right mouse button to zoom in towards the 3D object. Now to orbit, I can hold down the Alt or Option key, left click on the 3D object, and this will create a pivot point from which the viewport will orbit around the 3D model. Now to pan, I'll hold down the Alt or Option key once again, middle mouse click this time, and then click and drag to pan the 3D view. And using these keyboard shortcuts for navigation is much quicker to navigate my 3D scene. Now, let's take a look at creating a new camera. So I'm going to come up here to Layer and choose New Camera. And this is going to create for me a new camera. I'm going to leave everything at default and click OK. Now here in my layer stack, I have a new camera, and you can see that the 3D view has been reset. Now here in the composition panel, you can see that I have this 3D view pop-up. There's lots of different camera options. You can see I have my traditional front, left, top camera orthographic views. Here towards the top, you can see that my active camera is set to this camera 1. This is the new camera that I just created. So here we can choose different cameras. Let's take a look at how we can first set up our camera view. So again, using my navigation keyboard shortcuts, using Alt or Option and my right mouse button, I'm going to zoom in. Alt or Option, left click and drag. I'm going to orbit. Here, let's just orbit this watch around. And now I need to pan. Alt or Option, middle mouse click and drag. And now I have set up my shot. I can also split this view. So if I come over to the composition window, there is a section here for views. And if I click this option, I'm going to split this into two views. And let's take a look at what I have. So here on the left side, I have my default camera. So again, if we look at that 3D pop-up, I can set this to camera 1. This is the camera that I want to be viewing my shot through, or this is my render camera. And then over here on the second panel, I have this left view. And I can set this to a different view by clicking this 3D pop-up. So here I could choose to view the top view, let's say. And this would allow me to, say, select my camera and then move the camera in 3D space by using the transform handles. Or if I like, again, I can click the pop-up and choose something like my default view. This is like a standard perspective view in a 3D program. And using the same viewport navigation, holding down Alt or Option and left click and drag, I can then just pan this view around. And this allows me to have a perspective view if I want to, say, grab the watch just by left click to select it, hold on to, let's say, one of the axis handles like the X-axis, and then reposition a 3D object in space. Using this to view allows me to change things from a perspective angle, but then see the changes here through my shot camera that I just created. So I'll come back over here to my views and set this here to view 1. And now, once again, I can always check here that in the top left corner, it's going to tell me what camera I'm looking through, and I see that I'm looking through my camera 1, which is shown here in my layer stack. Now you can animate 3D objects just as you would any layer in After Effects. Here I'm adding keyframes to the Y rotation of the 3D asset and adjusting the speed graph to create a spinning animation, as you can see here. Next, let's talk about lighting. So here I'm going to go to Layer and I'm going to choose to create a new light. And we now have a new light type for environment. This light creates image-based lighting with shadows. Once I click OK, you can see that I now have this environment light here in my layer stack. Underneath the source, you can see that I can choose a source for this light. This light is going to use a high dynamic range image, or HDR, to light the scene. Using the Creative Cloud desktop app, I can once again browse the Substance 3D assets to download an HDR image for use with my environment light in After Effects. Now, at this time, After Effects only supports the .hdr format, so you will need to convert the EXR from Substance 3D assets to HDR using Photoshop. In After Effects, I've imported the HDR file and then placed that file into my layer stack. Now, I can set the source option for the environment light to this HDR layer to light my 3D scene. Now, I can change the lighting direction by jumping over here to the transform, and I have an X and Y rotation. I'm going to want to change the Y rotation. So here, as I start to change the degree, you'll notice here that my lighting angle is changing. And this is how I can rotate my environment to create a different directional lighting here for my scene. And I'm just going to rotate this to around maybe 140 degrees. I think this is going to work. I also have controls for things like my lighting intensity, as you can see here. Now that I have my lighting set up, I can start to look at shadows and render quality. And you've probably noticed I don't really see any shadows here on the 3D asset. So let's come over here to my 3D renderer options. Here in this dropdown, you can see I'm using the new Advanced 3D Renderer. Let's take a look at the renderer options. Here I have my global render quality setting as well as my shadows settings. Shadows in After Effects are computed by a voxel grid based on the casting box. In this case, my casting box does not encompass my 3D asset, and I can quickly fix that by clicking the Fit to Scene button. The casting box can now be visualized in the comp window, and it illustrates the size and position of the voxel grid. Now, it's important to understand that the context of the scene is anything that is visible in the comp window. A lower casting box can increase performance by allowing you to get a higher fidelity shadow with a lower resolution setting. The resolution and smoothness affect memory usage. 3D objects outside the casting box will not cast shadows. However, they can still receive shadows, so you will want to consider the casting box size for animated models. You can increase the render quality to get higher fidelity shadows. I like to find a good balance between quality and playback speed. Now that I have my shadows, I will create a ground plane by creating a new solid and setting this layer to be a 3D layer. I will then position and rotate this 3D plane to be underneath the watch. Lastly, I can set some material properties, such as setting the metal value to 0 and the diffuse to 100. So now with my lighting and shadows and ground plane in place, I can jump back to my environment light and under my Y rotation make some further adjustments to my lighting direction. Now as I adjust the value, I can see that my scene is updating pretty slowly due to my quality settings. So I'm going to go to my fast previews and set it to adaptive resolution. Next, I'll go to Settings, Previews, and make sure the Adaptive Resolution limit is set to 1/2. Now, as I make changes to the scene, the resolution is lowered and then snaps back to higher quality. I find this to be a great way to work by striking a key balance between quality and performance. And you can always increase the render quality for the final output. Another option you have when working is to use Draft 3D. So if I enable Draft 3D, this drops me into a draft mode where shadows are disabled and the render quality is lowered. However, this view works extremely fast. So again, it's just another option you have at your disposal. Now let's take a quick look at two important aspects of working with 3D. Here I have a 2D layer composited over my scene. If we take a look at our 3D layers, they are contained within a bin. If you put a 2D layer in the middle of your scene, it splits into two separate scenes. And you can see in this case, it breaks my shadow casting onto my ground plane. The way to think about it is you're rendering each bin to a frame that's composited in the layer stack. Here you can see I've added a new spotlight to my scene to create some rim lighting. The light works, I can position and set intensity. However, 3D lights do not cast shadows at this time. Only the environment light will cast shadows. However, adding additional lights, as I've done here, can be good for different lighting scenarios. The last thing I want to cover in this introduction is how to apply effects to the 3D models we've imported into After Effects. So the short answer is that you can't apply effects directly to the 3D model. However, there are several options that you have. You can pre-compose the comp, you can use an adjustment layer. However, any effect that takes a layer as an input can use a 3D layer, and this opens up some interesting possibilities. From the Layer menu, I'm going to choose to create a new solid. And I'll name this Effects, and let's click OK to create the solid here at the top of my layer stack. Next, I'm going to jump over to the Effects and Presets and do a search here for Calculations. And I will apply this effect here to the effects solid. Now, for the second layer, I'm going to choose that sports watch. This is my 3D model where I want to apply my effects. I'll also take the second layer opacity and set this to 100, and then set the blending mode to copy. Now, I've created a 2D version of this 3D layer. Okay, so back to the effects layer, let's apply another effect. In this case, I'm just going to grab a hue and saturation, and let's just place this here onto the effects. And then I'm just going to make an adjustment here to something like, say, the master hue. So as I make this change, you can see I'm now colorizing my 3D layer. Now, what's really awesome about this is I can just jump over now to my 3D layer and change, say, the position. So if I update the position, say, on the X or maybe the Z, you can see that that 2D layer is updating as well. So using calculations on a solid is a great way to create effects or apply effects to 3D models I've imported into my After Effects composition. What I enjoy most about this new 3D workflow is the ease in which you can blend 2D layers such as text and video with 3D content to enrich your projects, all without needing to leave After Effects. Adding Substance 3D to the mix provides an incredible solution for creating realistic materials. I will end this introduction to 3D in After Effects with a simple project created fully in After Effects with Substance 3D.